Yes, DNA registries are the newest tool for investigators, helping police nab suspects in several high-profile cases, cold cases. Most notably, the Golden State serial killings. Well, now it could finally help bring closure for two Alabama families.
Warning, this video is a true story and contains descriptions of violence, murder, and disturbing content. Viewer discretion is advised.
You are standing in the parking lot of a gas station in Ozark, Alabama. It is just past 11 o'clock at night on the last day of July 1999. The fluorescent lights above the pumps hum at a frequency you can feel in your teeth. A moth keeps hitting the glass of the sign over and over like it hasn't learned yet that some things you cannot get to. The air smells like gasoline and cut grass and faintly like rain that hasn't fallen yet. Two girls are standing by a black Mazda. 17 years old, both of them. One of them is laughing, the kind of laugh that comes easy when you're young and you've gotten lost on the way to a party and decided it's funny instead of frightening. The other is on a payphone, the metal cord twisted around her finger, telling her mother not to worry. We just got turned around, we're heading back now. A woman walks out of the store with her daughter, points down the road, gives directions the way people do in small towns, by landmarks, not street names. Past the church, past the feed store, you'll hit the highway. The girls thank her. They get in the car. The tail lights swing out of the lot and onto the road, two small red points shrinking into the dark. That is the last time anyone who loved them will ever see them alive. Somewhere between that gas station and home, something happens that no one will be able to explain for 20 years. Not the mothers waiting by their phones, not the police who will search through the night, not the detectives who will grow old still carrying this case in their chests. Something has already gone permanently, irreversibly wrong. You just don't know the shape of it yet. Welcome to True Cold Case Central, the channel where the files never stay closed and the questions don't get to rest until the truth does. This case is one of the rare ones, a double murder that sat frozen for 2 full decades, broken open not by a confession, but by a piece of science that didn't even exist when the crime was committed. If you're new here, drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from tonight. Hit like, hit subscribe. It genuinely is what keeps this channel digging through county archives and court transcripts so you don't have to. Now let's go back. But before we go any further, you need to know who J.B. Beasley and Tracie Hawlett were. Not the headline, not the case file number, the human beings. J.B., her full name was J.B. Hilton. Green Beasley, though almost no one ever used it, was born in Troy, Alabama, in the summer of 1982. By the time she was a teenager, her family described her in one consistent way, full of energy. She loved to dance, the kind of dancing that didn't need an audience or an occasion, just a kitchen floor and a song she liked. In junior high, she'd been part of the Junior Honor Society and the cheer squad, a girl who showed up for things, who didn't sit on the sidelines of her own life. Tracie Hawlett had grown up faster than she should have had to. Her father died when she was only 4 years old, and from that early loss, she became, by every account, the kind of daughter who checked in, who called her mother, who let people know where she was, which is part of why. That night, she found a payphone in a gas station parking lot in a town she'd never meant to be in, just to say, "We're okay, we're coming home." The two of them were best friends, the kind forged in hallways and car rides and 100 small inside jokes nobody else would ever understand. On July 31st, 1999, J.B. turned 17. The plan was simple, the kind of plan that happens in small towns across the country every single weekend. Drive over to a party in a neighboring town, celebrate a birthday, come home before curfew. They left in J.B.'s family car, a black 1993 Mazda 929, a car that probably smelled like fast food and cassette tapes and the particular mix of perfumes two teenage girls share. Somewhere along the way, in the dark, on unfamiliar roads, they got lost. They ended up nearly 20 miles from where they meant to be in the town of Ozark, asking strangers for directions home. That detail matters, hold on to it. A wrong turn on an ordinary Saturday night is the only reason this story happened, where it happened, the way it happened, to two girls who were simply trying to find their way back to the people who loved them. Picture them in that car for a moment. Before any of this, J.B. was the one who'd insist on choosing the radio station, who never let a birthday pass without making sure everyone around her knew exactly how excited she was about it. Tracie was quieter by comparison, the steady one, the friend who remembered to bring a jacket when the night turned cool. Together they were the kind of pair you'd see in any hallway, in any cafeteria, in any town in America. Inseparable, a little loud, completely unaware that they were living through what would, decades later, become the last ordinary night of their lives. Their mothers would later describe them less in the language of a case file and more in the language of absent. The empty chair at a holiday table, the angel figurines bought year after year to stand in for a daughter who should have been there to receive them herself. J.B.'s mother, Cheryl, called her daughter a beautiful gift. Tracie's mother, Carol, said she still heard her daughter's voice some nights, even decades on. The kind of haunting that never quite settles into ordinary memory because the loss itself never finishes happening. These were not statistics waiting to be solved. They were daughters, first and always, and that is the lens through which every fact that follows needs to be understood. Approximately 11 p.m., the Big Little Store, a Chevron station and convenience store on East Broad Street in Ozark, Alabama. Security at the time was minimal. No networked cameras feeding a monitoring station, nothing like what a gas station would have today. Just lights, a counter, and whoever happened to be standing in the lot. 11:35 p.m. to the phone call. Tracie uses a payphone outside the store to call her mother, Carol Roberts. She explains they got lost on the way to the party, that they stopped for directions, that they're heading home now. It is an ordinary call, a daughter checking in. It is also the last confirmed proof of life anyone would ever have. Shortly after the directions, a woman in the parking lot, a stranger just there, buying a drink with her own daughter, points the girls toward the highway that leads back to Dothan. She watches their car pull out of the lot. She has no way of knowing she is the last friendly face either girl will ever see. Somewhere on the drive between that gas station and the road home, the girl's path crosses with someone else's. We do not know the exact mile marker. We do not know the exact minute. What we know is that the black Mazda never makes it back to Dothan that night, and that this is the single point in the timeline where an ordinary teenage Saturday quietly, irreversibly, becomes a crime scene. Here is what J.B. and Tracie did not know, standing in that parking lot, laughing about being lost, that the directions they'd just been given would be the last normal piece of information either of them would ever receive. That somewhere ahead of them on that dark road was a turn they would not get to make on their own terms. The next morning, approximately 9 a.m., Herring Avenue, Ozark. A passerby notices the black Mazda parked, abandoned-looking, along a quiet stretch of road. Inside, the girls' personal belongings are scattered, the small, mundane debris of two teenagers' lives. In the trunk, investigators make the discovery that will define this case for the next 24 years. Both girls shot in the head. Later, that day, 2 households, 2 phone calls. Carol Roberts had already begun to worry when her daughter didn't come home. J.B.'s parents had done the same. Both families had called the police that morning to report the girls missing. not yet knowing they were calling to report something far worse than a curfew broken. Before we move to the investigation itself, it's worth slowing down here, because this case was never short on people who almost saw something. The woman who gave the girls directions in the parking lot, her daughter standing beside her, the unknown number of other customers who passed through that Chevron station on a Saturday night in late July, truckers, locals, teenagers on their own way to their own parties. East Broad Street was and is a road that sees steady traffic. This was not some remote, forgotten corner of the county. It was a working gas station in an active part of town, and then there is the road itself, the stretch leading out toward Herring Avenue, a quiet residential road close enough to town that a parked car would eventually be noticed, but isolated enough at that hour that whatever happened there could happen without a single set of headlights catching it. Somewhere in that small, unremarkable geography, a gas station, a highway on-ramp, a quiet side road, two 17-year-olds passed within reach of dozens of ordinary lives that night, and not one of those lives intersected with theirs in a way that could save them. That is the particular cruelty of this case, not a remote wilderness, not an empty highway in the middle of nowhere, but a small populated town going about its Saturday night, utterly unaware of what was unfolding a few streets over. Here is the institutional reality of forensic investigation in America in 1999 that most people have never fully reckoned with.
The technological gap. DNA evidence, semen recovered from Beasley's clothing, was collected and preserved almost immediately. Investigators believed, correctly, that they had the killer's genetic signature in hand. But in 1999, the National DNA Database, CODIS, was still a young and limited system. It could only identify a suspect if that suspect's profile already existed in the database, meaning a prior conviction, a prior arrest that required a sample. A man with no criminal record, no prior contact with the system, was functionally invisible to it. The science to find him simply hadn't been built yet. The procedural gap. Investigators conducted what amounted to more than 500 interviews and tested DNA samples from over 70 potential suspects over the following years. An extraordinary volume of manual investigative labor. Every one of those tests came back negative. This was not a case of police failing to work hard. It was a case of working immensely hard within a system that had no tool capable of closing the loop. The legal and resource gap. Cold case units, as we understand them today, dedicated, funded, ongoing, were far less common and far less resourced in small jurisdictions like Ozark in the early 2000s. A case like this could occupy a department's full attention for the first months, and then, by necessity, recede as new crimes demanded new resources. Reward money was offered. Tips came in. Most led nowhere. Consider what that actually meant on the ground, in practice, for the families. Carol Roberts and Cheryl Burgoon did not get a dedicated detective checking in with quarterly updates. They got the case the way most cold case families get the case, in waves, a flurry of activity after a new tip. Long, silent stretches in between, where the only sound was the holidays arriving and leaving without an answer. The system was not cruel by design. It was simply built for a different era, one without the genetic tools that would, eventually, make all the difference. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through real records, real court filings, real families willing to talk about the worst day of their lives. If this one is sitting with you the way it's sitting with us, take 10 seconds, hit like, hit subscribe. It really does keep us digging. It would take a full 19 years, and a breakthrough used famously in an entirely different case on the opposite side of the country, before the tools finally caught up to the evidence that had been sitting in a lab, waiting the entire time. In the immediate aftermath, the pressure on Ozark and Dothan investigators was immense. 2 teenage girls murdered in a town where that kind of violence simply did not happen. The community wanted an arrest. It would get one. Twice, in fact, before the right one ever came. Weeks after the murders, a man was arrested and charged in connection with the killings after implicating himself, claiming he had been present at the crime scene. For a moment, it must have felt like the case was closing. But when a grand jury reviewed the evidence against him, it declined to indict. His account did not hold up. He was eventually revealed to have fabricated his involvement. By his own later admission, in pursuit of reward money he hoped to pass along to his family. The uncomfortable truth is that false confessions are not rare in high-profile cases. The desperation of investigators for resolution, and sometimes the desperation of confessors for relevance or money, can collide in ways that waste critical time and resources. The out-of-state lead. Another tip pointed investigators toward a man living as far away as Michigan, who had allegedly confessed to the murders. It is unclear what drove this confession, whether attention-seeking, mental illness, or some other motive entirely. But it, too, collapsed under the weight of physical evidence. His DNA did not match the sample recovered from the crime scene. Another door closed. Another piece of the public's hope for resolution quietly extinguished. A re-examination of existing documents from this period shows a pattern common to many cold cases. A flood of tips and theories in the first year, narrowing to a trickle, and then nothing. By the early 2000s, the file had gone, in the most literal sense, cold. The physical evidence remained carefully preserved. The DNA sample, recovered from Beasley's body and clothing, sat in storage for the better part of 2 decades, a known quantity with no name attached to it. That gap between we have his DNA and we don't know who he is the quiet horror at the center of this case's long middle act. Investigators were never working blind. They were working with the truth already in their hands. They simply had no way for 19 years to read it. Year after year, the file would be pulled out, reviewed, and put back. New detectives inherited it from retiring ones. Each fresh set of eyes would read the same interview transcripts, look at the same crime scene photographs, and arrive at the same conclusion the last detective had. The evidence was solid. The suspect pool was exhausted, and the technology to bridge that gap simply did not yet exist. There is a particular kind of professional grief in that, knowing exactly what you need to solve a case and having to wait year after year for the rest of the world to catch up to the problem in front of you. In 2018, Ozark Police Chief Marlos Walker was watching the news when a story caught his attention. Investigators in California had just identified the Golden State Killer, a man responsible for a string of murders and assaults decades earlier, using a technique called forensic genetic genealogy. Rather than searching a criminal database, this method ran crime scene DNA against public genealogy websites, the same kind of consumer ancestry databases ordinary people use to build their family trees. Walker made a phone call that week. By August of 2018, the department had sent its preserved DNA sample to a private lab in Virginia, asking a question no one had been able to ask in 1999. Not is this man in our system, but who are this man's relatives? 5 months passed. Then, in early 2019, results came back. A list of possible genetic matches, built not from a criminal record, but from a family tree. Genetic genealogist C.C. Moore, working the case, helped trace the DNA profile through that tree to a specific family in Dothan, Alabama. And on that list was a name investigators recognized, not from a criminal file, because there wasn't one, but simply because it was a name from their own community. A man with no criminal history. A truck driver, a preacher who had founded his own small ministry, a husband married to the same woman he'd been dating in 1999. Detectives quietly arranged for a new DNA sample, drawn directly from him this time, not inferred from a family tree, but his own. The wait for those results must have felt, after 20 years, unbearably short and impossibly long all at once. The sample was a match. It is worth pausing on the strange, quiet way this moment must have unfolded. No dramatic raid, no high-speed chase, just a man, going about his ordinary life, driving his truck, preaching to his small congregation, coming home to his wife, agreeing, perhaps at her urging, to provide a sample that would change everything. Investigators later said he was never on their radar in 1999. No witness had ever placed him near the girls. No prior arrest had ever put his name in a system. For 19 years, he had simply been a man living one town over, indistinguishable from anyone else, while the truth about him sat coiled inside a single vial of preserved evidence, waiting for a question that had not yet been invented. In March of 2019, Coley McCraney, a man who had lived his entire adult life one town over from where the murders occurred, who had built a family, a ministry, a quiet and unremarkable existence, was arrested and charged with capital murder. He was tried in 2023, 24 years after that Saturday night outside a gas station. He took the stand and claimed he'd had consensual contact with Beasley, that he had not killed either girl. A jury did not believe him. After one day of deliberation, he was convicted on 4 counts, including capital murder and rape, and sentenced to life in prison. It is worth, here, going back to who they were. J.B. Beasley was 17. She loved to dance in her kitchen for no audience but herself. She had just had a birthday, the very birthday she was driving out to celebrate when her path crossed with the man who would end her life. Tracie Hawlett was 17. She had lost her father young and grown into the kind of daughter who always called home. Who did, in fact, call home. One last time, from a payphone outside a gas station, simply to say she was on her way. Their legacy is not contained in a verdict. It lives in the fact that their case became one of the clearest American examples of forensic genetic genealogy succeeding where traditional DNA databases physically could not, a technique that has since been used to reopen cold cases across the country, giving other grieving families a tool that did not exist when J.B. and Tracie were killed. Their mothers waited 24 years for an answer that came not because someone confessed, not because a witness finally spoke, but because science finally learned how to ask the right question of evidence that had been sitting, patiently, the entire time. There is something worth sitting with in that timeline. 24 years is long enough for an infant to grow into an adult, long enough for a small-town gas station to be rebuilt, renamed, repainted. Long enough for the detectives who first walked that crime scene to retire, and in some cases, to pass the case file to people who weren't even born when J.B. and Tracie were killed. And still, somewhere in a cold storage locker, a single preserved sample waited, patient in a way that no human investigator could be, indifferent to the passage of years, holding the answer the entire time. That is the strange mercy buried inside this tragedy. Nothing was ever truly lost. It only had to wait for the world to catch up. If there is a single, grounded takeaway here, it is this. Know where your children are going. Know who they're with. Encourage them, gently, not fearfully, to call when plans change, the way Tracie did. Most nights that call is just a daughter checking in, but it is also, sometimes, the only piece of the truth a family will have for a very, very long time. And if you are ever the one giving directions to a stranger on a dark road, know this too. You may be the last ordinary kindness someone receives. Make it count. Thank you for sitting with this one with us. Hit like, hit subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. And remember, no case stays cold forever.